Across America, thousands of vintage cabooses sit rotting in rail yards, abandoned fields, and scrap lots. Collectors have offered serious money to buy them, yet railroads consistently refuse. The reason why exposes a hidden side of the rail industry no one talks about. Rows of rusting cabooses line forgotten sidings and weed-choked storage lots, each one a silent monument to a vanished era. In the early 1980s, railroads across the United States retired tens of thousands of these cars almost overnight. The change was staggering. From nearly 30,000 cabooses in service at the end of the 1970s, the fleet shrank to a fraction of that number within just a few years. Some were scrapped for metal, others left to decay, but a surprising number simply sat, untouched and unwanted, even as demand for them soared. For generations, the caboose was the living heart of the freight train, a rolling office, bunkhouse, and lookout post all in one. Its bright colors and distinctive silhouette became a fixture in American memory, woven into childhood train sets, postcards, and stories passed down through families. The caboose was more than a piece of equipment. It was a symbol of the railroad's human touch, the place where the crew worked, ate, and watched the rails disappear behind them. The abrupt disappearance of these cars left a mark not just on the landscape, but on the national imagination. Yet as the nostalgia deepened, so did the contradiction. Collectors, museums, and even small-town businesses began offering real money, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, for the chance to rescue a caboose from oblivion. Listings in hobbyist magazines and auction catalogs showed a steady stream of eager buyers, each hoping to preserve a piece of history. Despite this, the supply remained stubbornly out of reach. Railroads, holding on to their retired cabooses by the hundreds, refused to sell. The result was a paradox. A flood of demand met by a wall of silence, with the cars themselves left to rot in plain sight. This disconnect has fueled a sense of loss that goes beyond nostalgia. It raises a deeper question. Why would railroads let so many iconic cars fade away, when so many people are willing to give them a new life? The answer, buried beneath layers of corporate policy and legal caution, reveals a side of the industry few outsiders ever see. The caboose once stood as the nerve center of every freight train, packed with purpose. Conductors managed paperwork and orders at a cramped desk. Brakemen watched for shifting loads, leaking air hoses, and overheated axles, ready to pull an emergency valve or radio for help. The car doubled as a bunkhouse, a kitchen, and a rolling lookout post. But by the late 1970s, the railroad world was changing faster than any crew could keep up. Technology and policy swept in together. In 1980, Congress passed the Staggers Rail Act, a law that gave railroads unprecedented freedom to set rates, abandon unprofitable routes, and streamline operations. With profit now tied directly to efficiency, every extra crew member and every unnecessary car became a target for elimination. The caboose, heavy and labor-intensive, was first in the crosshairs. At almost the same moment, a new device appeared on the rails, an end-of-train monitor called EOT. Instead of a crewman peering out the cupola, a small battery-powered box could now sense brake pressure, signal the engineer, and flash a warning light at the rear of the train. The Federal Railroad Administration approved the first EOT units in 1982. By 1984, mass-produced units like Safetran and Westinghouse models were rolling out by the thousands. These compact devices cost a fraction of a caboose's upkeep and never needed sleep or overtime pay. Retired conductor Ray Harmon remembers the change as sudden and absolute. He remembers one week we were running 3-man crews checking every coupling by hand. The next, management told us to clear out our lockers. The box is coming off. With the Staggers Act fueling a race to cut costs and EOT units making rear crews obsolete, railroads retired more than 16,000 cabooses between 1982 and 1986 alone. yards filled with idle cars. For collectors and museums, it looked like a golden opportunity, but the sudden surplus only deepened the mystery. If so many cabooses were now unwanted, why did railroads refuse to let them go? Bidding wars broke out in the pages of hobbyist newsletters and at live auctions across the country. As soon as word spread that cabooses were leaving the rails, collectors, museums, and even small-town businesses lined up with cash in hand. The numbers told the story. In 1984, auction records show average bids between $2,200 and $3,500 for a standard steel caboose. Rare models, like the Pullman-built cupola cars, sometimes topped $6,000. By the late 1980s, private offers for restored, painted examples climbed as high as $25,000. A handful of restaurant owners and entrepreneurs paid even more, hoping to turn a piece of railroad history into a roadside attraction or a themed diner. The emotional pull ran deep. For lifelong rail fans, owning a caboose became a dream rooted in childhood, the chance to rescue a symbol before it vanished entirely. Museums saw an opportunity to preserve living history, to let visitors climb aboard, and imagine the days when the end of every freight train meant a flash of red and a friendly wave from the cupola. For some, the chase was personal, a way to honor a father or grandfather who'd spent decades working the rails. The financial logic was just as strong. As the supply of available cabooses shrank, prices rose. Auction catalogs from 1985 to 1987 list more than 60 sales, with the best-kept units fetching $8,000 or more. Even as scrap dealers offered $300 to $500 per car, collectors routinely outbid them, hoping to save the last good examples before they disappeared into the torch and the crusher. Demand peaked in the mid-1980s, then slowly faded as the pool of salvageable cars dried up. But for every successful bidder, dozens more found themselves locked out. Railroads held onto their fleets, unmoved by offers that would have easily covered the cost of removal. The collector boom created an odd tension: money and passion on one side, a silent, unmoving wall on the other. The question wasn't just why the railroads said no. It was what they feared more than the promise of easy cash. Union Pacific, BNSF Railway, CSX Transportation, and Norfolk Southern are the four giants that control nearly every mile of American mainline freight. Each one holds hundreds of retired cabooses in yards and storage tracks, yet all four have quietly built the same barrier: a policy of refusal when it comes to private sales. The collector boom of the 1980s and the 1990s did little to budge this stance. Offers poured in from museums, hobbyists, and entrepreneurs, but the answer was almost always the same: no sale, no exceptions, no negotiation. The wall is not written into law, but it is enforced with the weight of corporate policy. Union Pacific's asset managers have stated flatly that there is no program for selling cabooses to individuals, citing risk and brand exposure as non-starters. BNSF classifies its retired cabooses as restricted disposal, not for public sale, not for auction, and destined only for internal use or the scrapyard. CSX's official asset disposition policy excludes cabooses from commercial sale, listing hazardous materials and trademark misuse as the reasons. Norfolk Southern's legal team has testified in federal hearings that the company cannot risk transferring cabooses to non-employees due to the threat of future litigation. This is not a patchwork of isolated decisions. It is a uniform, industry-wide posture that treats the caboose as a liability to be contained, not a relic to be shared. The logic is cold and consistent. The risk of a lawsuit, a public relations disaster, or brand misuse far outweighs any one-time payment from a collector. Even as demand soared and prices climbed, the railroads doubled down, tightening their grip on the remaining fleet. The effect is unmistakable, a wall of silence and inaction, with the cars themselves left to rust in plain sight. The deeper reasons for this refusal, buried in legal memos and risk assessments, reveal a corporate logic that values control and caution above sentiment or preservation. A retired caboose may look harmless, but for railroad legal teams, it is a ticking time bomb. The cars were built in an era when asbestos insulation and lead-based paint were standard features, not hazards. Today, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration treat these materials as serious threats, and they demand strict abatement before any transfer or sale. The cost of stripping a single caboose of asbestos can run upwards of $20,000, sometimes more than the car's entire market value. Add in the removal of lead-based paint, and the bill climbs higher. For a railroad, every caboose is a potential lawsuit waiting to happen. Transportation liability attorney Sandra Perez has spent years advising railroads on asset disposal. She points out that under federal law, the original owner can be dragged into court years after a caboose changes hands if a future owner, tenant, or even a visitor claims health effects from residual asbestos or lead dust. The legal exposure does not end at the sale. It lingers for decades, tied to the railroad's name. Faced with these risks, railroads have little incentive to sell. The price a collector might offer rarely covers even the cost of mandatory environmental testing, let alone full remediation. Scrapping, by contrast, is quick, final, and shifts liability to a certified recycler. In the calculus of corporate risk, the caboose is less a piece of history than a legal headache, one best kept off the market entirely. A caboose in faded red or yellow, still bearing the Union Pacific shield or the blue and orange BNSF swoosh, is more than a piece of rolling stock. It's a billboard that never stops advertising. For railroad executives, that's a problem. Once a caboose leaves company property, its fate is out of their hands. It might end up as a roadside diner, a playground fixture, or even in the middle of a controversial art installation. Whatever happens next, the company's logo goes with it, exposed to vandalism, neglect, or uses that clash with the railroad's carefully managed image. Brand managers inside the major railroads see every retired caboose as a potential public relations risk. One spokesperson for a Class 1 carrier put it bluntly, "We can't have our name on something we don't control. If it's rusting behind a bar or covered in graffiti, it's our reputation that takes the hit." In the age of social media, a single photo of a battered caboose with a recognizable logo can circulate far beyond its original context, sparking questions the company can't answer and damage it can't undo. Railroads operate under the same brand management playbook as major consumer companies. Their trademarks are registered and enforced, not just on locomotives and advertising, but on every piece of equipment that bears the corporate livery. Allowing a caboose to leave the property with its original paint intact is seen as opening the door to misuse, parody, or negative publicity. The logo, once a symbol of trust and reliability, becomes a wild card, one that corporate communications teams would rather keep out of play. The result is a policy of ironclad control. If a caboose can't be debranded and accounted for, it won't be sold at all. Inside the rail yard, a retired caboose rarely stays idle for long. Maintenance of way supervisors see these cars not as relics, but as resources, ready to be stripped, welded, and reassigned. A faded cupola might become a shoving platform for switching cars in the yard, or be refitted as a rolling tool shed for track crews. One supervisor says they cannot just let them go, and even a battered old caboose is worth more to the railroad as a work car than as a souvenir. When a caboose is truly surplus, the next stop is the scrap yard. Scrap dealers bid low, often just a few $100s per car, But for the railroad, the appeal is simplicity. No paperwork, no lingering liability, no risk of a lawsuit or a tarnished logo showing up on social media. The deal is clean, the car is torched apart, the steel is weighed, and payment lands in the company's account in a matter of days. For those hoping to buy, the final barrier is logistics. Moving a 50,000-pound caboose off railroad property is a feat of heavy-haul engineering. Specialized flatbeds, cranes, and permits drive the cost into the tens of thousands, often more than the car itself is worth. Scrapyards can absorb those costs by breaking down the car on site, but private buyers face a dead end. The math is ruthless. For the railroad, scrapping is fast, safe, and final. For the collector, the door stays firmly shut. A handful of cabooses have managed to escape the scrapyard, but each survivor carries a complicated story. Museum curator Diane Lewis keeps a handwritten ledger of every known example, tracing about 350 preserved units across the country, some restored to their original paint, others stripped bare of all markings. For public institutions, the path to acquisition is narrow and fraught with red tape. Railroads often require museums to sign extensive liability waivers and pay for hazardous material abatement, costs that can rival the purchase price itself. Even then, the railroad's legal team may insist that all logos and reporting marks be sanded off before the car leaves company property, erasing much of what makes the piece historic. Short-line railroads offer a rare backdoor. Owners like Ben Carter, who runs a 40-mile regional line in Pennsylvania, describe a process that blends negotiation with luck. When a Class 1 parent retires a caboose, it sometimes passes quietly to a short line, where the branding is removed and the car is either resold at auction or donated to a local historical group. Carter estimates that, in the last decade, fewer than 40 cabooses have changed hands this way, often snapped up by collectors or repurposed as tourist attractions. Auctions run by regional dealers list only a handful of cabooses each year, and buyers must act fast. For every unit that finds a new home, dozens more vanish from the books, their numbers and histories erased in the process. The preservation tally remains stubbornly low, a testament to how narrow the window truly is. Headlines of train derailments and hazardous spills have become a regular feature on national news, each one drawing fresh attention to the risks that shadow the railroad industry. In recent years, incidents involving tank cars and aging rolling stock have triggered waves of public scrutiny and lawsuits that reach far beyond the immediate scene. For railroad executives, every image of twisted steel and corporate logos in the background is a warning. Liability and reputation are never more than a single accident away from disaster. The pressure is relentless. In 2023, a high-profile derailment in Ohio led to months of investigations and millions in legal claims. News outlets replayed footage of scorched rail cars, while attorneys dissected every aspect of the equipment's history and maintenance. Even cars retired decades earlier came under new suspicion, as regulators asked whether any lingering equipment could still pose a threat. For railroads, the message was clear. Anything bearing the company's name, no matter how old or seemingly harmless, is a potential target for blame. This climate of heightened caution has only deepened the industry's reluctance to let go of its old cabooses. The risk calculus is no longer about the value of scrap metal versus a collector's bid, but about the unpredictable cost of a single lawsuit or viral news story. In a world where reputation can be shredded overnight, the fate of these rusting icons is now tied to a much larger question. How much risk can a railroad afford to release into the wild? The answer, for now, remains locked behind closed doors, leaving collectors and preservationists to wonder if the last cabooses will vanish before anyone can save them. Today, the few cabooses that survive on rail property are locked behind legal barriers and corporate caution, not nostalgia. As railroads tighten their grip on image and liability, private collectors face a vanishing horizon. The real question is not who gets to own a caboose, it is whether any will escape the scrapyard at all. The battle between preservation and erasure is still being fought, one forgotten relic at a time.